Emma Rose Thompson's weathered hands stopped mid-reach for the medicine bottle, her breath catching as she stared at the bloodied stranger collapsed against her doorframe. The dying cowboy's fingers clutched a crumpled letter written in her dead husband's unmistakable handwriting. It wasn't a plea for help. It was a confession of murder. 10-year-old Lucy screamed from the doorway, her medicine cup shattering against the wooden floor. 8-year-old Ben stumbled backward, his face draining of color as crimson spread beneath the stranger's body like spilled paint across their threshold. Emma's mind reeled between the impossible present and 6 months ago when federal marshals had told her John died of fever during a business trip, not investigating an Apache massacre. The letter's Apache words seemed to writhe in the morning light, each symbol a dagger through her carefully constructed grief. "Get the bandages, Lucy." "Now." Her voice remained steady despite her trembling hands and racing heart. Who was this man, and how had he gotten John's final letter? What secrets had her husband died protecting? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 6 months earlier, the Arizona Territory had stretched before Emma Rose Thompson like a promise written in red dust and endless sky. Her homestead, a modest claim of 160 acres outside Tucson, represented everything John had dreamed of: freedom, prosperity, and a legacy for their children. The morning he kissed her goodbye for his final business trip, Emma had stood in their doorway watching his figure disappear into the desert heat, never imagining she'd become a widow before the wildflowers bloomed. "Mama's not eating again," Lucy whispered to her younger brother as they huddled around their meager breakfast table. At 10 years old, she'd learned to count pennies and ration flour with the precision of a seasoned homesteader. Her cornflower blue eyes, so much like John's, held wisdom no child should possess. Ben, barely 8, but determined to be the man of the house, set his jaw with stubborn resolve. "I caught 3 rabbits yesterday." "We ain't gonna starve." His freckled face bore dirt streaks from dawn chores, and his too small shirt hung loose on his thin frame. Emma forced a smile, hiding the gnawing hunger that had become her constant companion. The children's portions always came first. She'd learned to survive on coffee and whatever scraps remained. Their modest savings had dwindled to $15.37, hidden in John's old tobacco tin beneath loose floorboards. The bank payment loomed like a thundercloud. $60 due in 3 weeks, or they'd lose everything. Mrs. Sarah Henderson, their 72-year-old neighbor, appeared daily with extra biscuits and knowing glances. Her weathered hands had delivered half the babies in Tucson Territory, and her sharp gray eyes missed nothing. "Child," she'd say, pressing preserves into Emma's reluctant hands, "pride's a luxury the poor can't afford. Accept help gracefully. Someday you'll be the one giving." The homestead itself told the story of dreams deferred. John's half-built barn stood skeletal against the horizon, its frame exposed like ribs. The vegetable garden struggled against the relentless Arizona sun, yielding barely enough to supplement their dwindling supplies. 3 scrawny chickens pecked at dust where once John had planned a proper coop for dozens. Emma's hands, once soft from her sheltered upbringing as a preacher's daughter, now bore calluses and permanent dirt stains. She'd learned to milk their one remaining cow, mend clothes by lamplight, and shoot rattlesnakes with John's old rifle. The woman who'd once fainted at the sight of blood now dressed wounds and birthed calves without flinching. In quiet moments, usually while darning clothes after the children slept, Emma would unfold John's last letter, the one the marshal had delivered with his effects. "My dearest Emma," it began, "if something happens to me, trust no one from the Thornfield family. The land remembers what men forget, and some secrets are worth dying for." She'd read those cryptic words 100 times, never understanding their meaning until a bloodied stranger collapsed at her door, carrying impossible proof that John's death was no accident. The stranger's blood soaked into Emma's kitchen floorboards as she knelt beside his unconscious form, her hands trembling despite years of frontier hardships. His expensive leather boots and fine wool shirt spoke of wealth, yet bullet holes and powder burns told a different story. Lucy pressed clean rags into her mother's hands while Ben stood guard at the window, John's old rifle clutched in his small fists. "Mama, he's saying something," Lucy whispered, leaning closer to the man's pale lips. Emma strained to listen as fevered words tumbled from his mouth. "Thornfield. Have to tell her. The canyon. 30 Apache. Children, too." His voice carried the refined accent of education, not the rough drawl of a common cowboy. Dark hair, matted with blood, framed a face that might have been handsome if not twisted with pain and guilt. As she cleaned his wounds, Emma's breath caught. The bullet had passed clean through his shoulder, but it was the scars beneath that made her hands still. Old knife wounds crisscrossed his chest, and a peculiar birthmark on his left shoulder resembled a bird in flight, exactly like the one John had described in his journal entries about the Thornfield family. "Ben, fetch my herb box," Emma commanded, her voice steadier than her racing heart. "Lucy, heat water for tea. Willow bark and sage." The stranger's eyes fluttered open as Emma dressed his wound. They were the clearest blue she'd ever seen, like winter sky over snow-capped mountains. For a moment, confusion clouded his gaze before awareness returned with devastating clarity. "Ma'am?" he gasped, attempting to rise. "I need to— the letter. Did you read—" "Stay still," Emma ordered, pressing him back down. "You've lost too much blood." His hand shot out, grasping her wrist with surprising strength. "The letter," he repeated urgently. "In my pocket. It's for you." "From John Thompson." Emma's world tilted sideways. "How do you know my husband's name?" "Because," the stranger whispered, his eyes closing as exhaustion claimed him. "He died trying to save mine." Emma's hands shook as she retrieved the blood-stained paper from his vest pocket. The familiar handwriting made her heart lurch, John's careful script, but written in obvious haste and terror. Some words were in English, others in what appeared to be Apache language, and still others in a code she didn't recognize. "My dearest Emma," the letter began, "if you're reading this, Daniel Thornfield has succeeded where I failed. The story they'll tell you about my death is a lie. I wasn't investigating land disputes. I was documenting a massacre." Emma sank into John's old chair, her legs no longer able to support her. Lucy peered over her shoulder, sounding out the simpler words while Ben continued his vigilant watch. "The Thornfield family built their fortune on Apache blood," the letter continued. 30 souls, including women and children, poisoned during a peace ceremony in Devil's Canyon. The government was told it was an Indian attack, but it was murder for gold-bearing land. I have proof hidden where only you can find it. Trust Daniel Thornfield. He's risking everything to expose his family's crimes." The letter ended with coordinates and a desperate postscript. "If something happens to me, Daniel will come. Help him, Emma. He's the only one who can make this right. I love you and the children more than my own life. Your devoted husband, John." Emma's tears blurred the ink as the devastating truth settled over her like a shroud. John hadn't died of fever during a business trip. He'd been murdered for threatening to expose a 30-year-old genocide. The federal marshals who delivered news of his death had lied. The complications that delayed his body's return suddenly made terrible sense. "Mama?" Lucy's voice seemed to come from far away. "Is that man the one Daddy wrote about?" Emma looked at the unconscious stranger. Daniel Thornfield, heir to blood money and bearer of family shame. His peaceful face belied the torment she'd heard in his fevered confession. According to John's letter, this man had chosen justice over family loyalty, truth over inherited wealth. A distant rumble of hoofbeats made Ben stiffen at the window. "Riders coming, Mama. 3 of them." Emma's blood turned to ice. If Daniel Thornfield was here, his family wouldn't be far behind. She thought of the Thornfield reputation, wealthy, powerful, and ruthlessly protective of their interests. They owned half the territory's politicians and had enough money to make problems disappear permanently. "Lucy, help me move him to the root cellar," Emma decided, her mother's instinct overriding her fear. "Ben, tell anyone who asks that you haven't seen a soul. Can you do that?" Her son nodded grimly, understanding more than his 8 years should allow. "Yes, Mama. Like when the Apache raiders came through last spring." As they struggled to move Daniel's unconscious form, Emma caught sight of his face in the lamplight. Despite everything, despite the danger he'd brought to her door, she saw something that made her heart ache with recognition. The same haunted look John had worn during his final weeks, the expression of a man carrying unbearable knowledge. The hoofbeats grew closer, and Emma knew their peaceful life was about to shatter completely. The 3 riders approached through the morning heat shimmer like harbingers of judgment. Emma positioned herself on the porch, blocking the doorway, while Lucy and Ben flanked her with practiced innocence. Years of frontier living had taught them that survival sometimes required selective truth-telling. The lead rider dismounted with fluid grace, his expensive black suit incongruous against the desert backdrop. He was perhaps 30, with angular features and cold gray eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of their modest homestead. His companions remained mounted, hands resting meaningfully on their sidearms. "Good morning, ma'am. Marcus Thornfield, attorney at law." He touched his hat with mock courtesy, but his smile never reached his eyes. "I'm looking for my brother. Tall fellow, dark hair, likely injured. Goes by Daniel these days, though he's used other names." Emma met his gaze steadily, drawing on every ounce of her preacher's daughter upbringing. "Haven't seen anyone matching that description, Mr. Thornfield? We don't get many visitors this far from town." Marcus's eyes narrowed as he studied her face, searching for deception. "My brother is troubled, Mrs. Thompson, prone to delusions and violent episodes since the war. For your family's safety, I need to find him quickly." The casual use of her name sent ice through Emma's veins. These men had come prepared, knowing exactly who lived here and why. Lucy pressed closer to her mother's side, instinctively sensing danger despite not understanding its source. "Are you the law?" Ben piped up with 8-year-old boldness, John's rifle still clutched in his small hands. Marcus chuckled, a sound like breaking glass. "In a manner of speaking, young man, my family has certain responsibilities in this territory. When Daniel disappeared from the sanitarium in Denver, we became concerned about public safety." Emma's mind raced. Sanitarium. Everything about Marcus's polished demeanor screamed deception, yet his authority felt genuine. The Thornfield name carried weight throughout Arizona territory. They owned mines, railroads, and politicians with equal ease. "If you see him," Marcus continued, pulling a silver card case from his vest, "don't approach. Send word immediately. There's a substantial reward for information leading to his safe return." He placed the embossed card on her porch rail, his fingers lingering as if reluctant to leave. "Beautiful children, Mrs. Thompson. You must worry about their safety, living so isolated." The threat hung in the desert air like heat shimmer. Emma straightened, channeling every ounce of her mother's steel spine. "My children and I manage just fine, Mr. Thornfield. We appreciate your concern, but as I said, we haven't seen your brother." Marcus studied her for a long moment before remounting his horse. "Of course, but memories can be unreliable in this heat. If anything comes to you, day or night, don't hesitate to contact me. I'm staying at the Grand Hotel in Tucson. He touched his hat again. Good day, Mrs. Thompson. Children. Emma held her position until the riders disappeared into wavering heat lines, then sagged against the doorframe. Lucy wrapped small arms around her waist, while Ben maintained his guard post, rifle at ready. "Mama, that man scared me," Lucy whispered. "He should scare you, baby girl. Men like that are dangerous when they smile." Emma retrieved Marcus's card, noting the expensive card stock and elaborate letterhead. Thornfield Holdings, Mining, Railways, and Territorial Development proclaimed their empire in gold-embossed letters. They found Daniel conscious but weak when they returned to the root cellar. His blue eyes were clearer now, though pain lines etched his face like premature aging. "Who came?" he asked, struggling to sit up. "Your brother Marcus. Says you escaped from a sanitarium in Denver." Emma helped him drink water, noting how his hands trembled. "Says you're dangerous." Daniel's laugh was bitter as desert wind. Marcus always was clever with half-truths. "I was in Denver, but not in any sanitarium. I was meeting with federal investigators providing evidence about the Devil's Canyon massacre." He touched his shoulder wound gingerly. "Someone didn't want that meeting to happen." "The men who shot you?" "Marcus's hired guns. He's been tracking me for months, ever since I started gathering proof against our father." Daniel's voice carried exhaustion beyond his physical injuries. "The Thornfield fortune is built on 30 Apache graves, Mrs. Thompson. My father convinced Chief Running Bear to attend a peace conference, then poisoned the ceremonial whiskey. Every man, woman, and child who drank died in agony." Emma felt sick imagining such calculated evil. "And Marcus knows?" "Marcus was there. He was only 14, but he watched it happen." Daniel's eyes held infinite sadness. "Our father told us the Apache had attacked first, that we'd acted in self-defense. I believed that lie for 15 years. "What changed?" Daniel reached into his shirt, withdrawing a leather pouch stained with old blood. Inside lay a child's beaded necklace, intricate patterns telling stories Emma couldn't read. "I found this in our house's foundation when I was adding a room for my wedding. Kept digging and found bones, 30 skeletons still wearing Apache burial goods." Lucy gasped, her hand covering her mouth. Even Ben lowered his rifle, overwhelmed by the horror of adult sins. "My fiancée couldn't live with the truth," Daniel continued quietly. "Margaret left me the day I told her. Said she couldn't marry into a family built on children's graves. That's when I knew I had to make it right, no matter the cost." Emma thought of John's letter, his desperate attempt to expose the same truth. "My husband found out about the massacre. That's why they killed him. John Thompson was a good man. He helped me gather evidence, map the burial site, document everything. When Marcus discovered our investigation," Daniel's voice broke. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Thompson. Your husband died because of my family's sins." The weight of revelation pressed down like desert heat. John hadn't died for abstract justice. He'd died protecting this haunted man who carried Apache children's bones like personal relics. Emma stared at Daniel Thornfield, seeing not the wealthy heir Marcus described, but a broken soul seeking redemption in a world that punished truth-tellers. "What happens now?" she asked. Daniel's blue eyes hardened with resolve. "Now we finish what your husband started, even if it destroys us all." Over the following days, Daniel's presence transformed their struggling homestead in ways that both comforted and unsettled Emma. Despite his injuries, he insisted on earning his keep, mending the barn roof with skills that spoke of expensive education rather than common labor. His hands, though calloused from recent hard living, moved with the precision of someone trained in engineering or architecture. "Uncle Dan, watch this," Ben called out, demonstrating a rope trick Daniel had taught him that morning. The boy's face glowed with hero worship as Daniel applauded his efforts. It had been months since Ben had smiled so freely, and Emma's heart ached watching her son bask in masculine attention he'd been denied since John's death. Lucy proved equally susceptible to Daniel's gentle charm. He helped her with arithmetic using Apache counting methods, explaining how different cultures approached numbers and mathematics. "Education opens doors, Miss Lucy," he said, sketching geometric patterns in the dirt. "Your father understood that. He said you were the smartest child in the territory." Emma paused in her washing, soap-slicked hands freezing mid-scrub. "You knew John well?" Daniel's expression grew distant. "Well enough to know he loved his family more than his own life. He talked about you constantly, how you'd grown from a sheltered preacher's daughter into the strongest woman in Arizona, how Lucy had your stubborn streak and Ben had his gentle heart." The intimacy of these details made Emma's chest tighten with conflicting emotions. This stranger knew things about her dead husband that she'd never heard, memories John had shared during his final dangerous weeks. It created an unsettling connection between them, as if Daniel carried pieces of John's soul alongside his terrible secrets. Mrs. Henderson appeared at sunset on Daniel's third day, her sharp gray eyes taking in the improvements with approval. The elderly woman moved with surprising spryness for her 72 years, carrying a basket of her famous cornbread and preserves. "So, you're the famous Daniel Thornfield," she said without preamble, settling into John's old chair with territorial authority. "I've been expecting you." Daniel froze in the act of adjusting the children's fishing lines. "Ma'am?" "Don't ma'am me, boy. I've been in this territory since before you were born. Knew your father when he was just another prospector with grand dreams and flexible morals." Mrs. Henderson's voice carried the weight of decades. "Also knew that Apache chief he murdered, Running Bear, was a good man, tried to make peace when wiser heads wanted war." Emma felt the air crackle with tension as Daniel slowly turned to face the elderly woman. His blue eyes held wariness mixed with something that might have been relief. "How much do you know?" he asked quietly. "Everything that matters. Saw the smoke from Devil's Canyon that night 30 years ago, heard the screaming carry on the wind." Mrs. Henderson's weathered hands gripped her walking stick until her knuckles showed white. "Your father came to me the next morning, shirt covered in blood, asking for medical supplies for Indian attack victims. I was young and stupid enough to believe him then." Lucy and Ben had gone very still, sensing adult conversation that would shape their understanding of the world. Emma wanted to send them away, but knew they'd already heard too much to be protected by ignorance. "When did you realize the truth?" Daniel asked. "When Running Bear's son came looking for his father 3 days later. Boy was maybe 14, spoke broken English, just wanted to know where the burial grounds were so he could say proper prayers." Mrs. Henderson's voice cracked with old grief. "I sent him away empty-handed, and he died that winter from grief and starvation. Some sins follow you to the grave, Mr. Thornfield." Daniel sank onto a wooden crate, his head in his hands. "I've been carrying their bones with me for 2 years, trying to find the right place to put them to rest, trying to find someone who knew them as people, not just victims." "There's one left," Mrs. Henderson said softly. "Running Bear's grandson lives with the reservation Apache near Tucson. Goes by Joseph Blackhorse now, but his real name is Charging Wolf. He's been waiting 30 years for someone to tell him what really happened to his grandfather." Emma felt pieces of a terrible puzzle clicking into place. "Is that why you've been helping us? Because you knew this day would come?" The elderly woman's smile held profound sadness. "Child, I've been waiting for someone brave enough to tell the truth since before your children were born. Your John was the first man with enough backbone to investigate. Now Daniel here might be the first Thornfield with enough conscience to make amends." As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of approaching horses made everyone tense. But this time, only one rider emerged from the desert heat, a tall Apache man, perhaps 60 years old, his weathered face bearing the stoic dignity of his people. He dismounted slowly, his dark eyes taking in the gathering with careful assessment. "Mrs. Henderson," he said in accented but clear English. "I felt the spirit stirring. Thought I might find answers here." Daniel rose shakily to his feet, his hand moving instinctively to the leather pouch containing the Apache relics. "You're Joseph Blackhorse, Running Bear's grandson." "I am. And you are the Thornfield who carries my grandfather's bones." The words hung in the desert air like a thunderclap. Emma watched Daniel's face cycle through shame, fear, and desperate hope as he slowly withdrew the blood-stained pouch. His hands trembled as he offered it to Joseph, who accepted it with the reverence of sacred ritual. Joseph opened the pouch carefully, his fingers tracing the beaded necklace and small carved figures inside. When he looked up, tears gleamed in his dark eyes. "These belong to my cousin, Little Hawk. He was 7 years old when he died." "I'm sorry," Daniel whispered, the words inadequate but heartfelt. "I'm so sorry for what my father did, for what my family took from yours." Joseph studied Daniel's face for a long moment, weighing sincerity against 30 years of grief. Finally he spoke. "Your father is dead?" "Yes, sir. 5 years now." "Good. But his sins live on in his fortune, in the land stolen with Apache blood." Joseph's voice hardened. "What will you do about that, Thornfield, son?" Daniel straightened, some inner steel replacing his broken posture. "I'll give it back, all of it. The land, the mining rights, everything built on your people's graves." "Daniel, no," Emma found herself saying, though she wasn't sure why. Perhaps because she was beginning to care for this haunted man, or perhaps because such complete restitution would destroy any chance of security for her own children. "It's the only way," Daniel said firmly. "I can't build a life on murdered children's bones. I won't." Joseph nodded slowly, respect replacing suspicion in his dark eyes. "Your words have the sound of truth, young Thornfield. But words are wind. What proof do you offer?" Daniel looked around the gathered faces, Emma's conflicted expression, the children's wide eyes, Mrs. Henderson's knowing nod, Joseph's careful hope. "I have documents, maps, witness statements from the men my father hired to bury the evidence. Everything needed to prosecute his memory and restore what was stolen." "And Marcus?" Mrs. Henderson asked shrewdly. "Your brother won't let family wealth disappear without a fight." "Marcus?" Daniel's voice grew troubled. "Marcus knows the truth but believes our father's version, that the Apache attacked first, that we acted in self-defense. He's convinced himself that giving back the land would be admitting to crimes we didn't commit." "What crimes did you commit?" Joseph asked pointedly. The question hit Daniel like a physical blow. He was quiet for so long that Emma thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I believed the lies for 15 years. I lived in comfort built on your family's suffering. I let the guilty men die of old age without facing justice." He met Joseph's eyes directly. "I'm complicit in their silence, even if I didn't pull the trigger or mix the poison." The admission hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Emma realized she was holding her breath, waiting to see if forgiveness could span 30 years of injustice. Joseph was quiet for a long time, his weathered hands holding the sacred relics as if weighing souls. Finally, he spoke with the authority of tribal elder and grieving grandson combined. "The dead demand justice, not just sorrow. If you truly seek redemption, Thornfield son, you will face the consequences of truth-telling. Federal marshals, territorial courts, newspaper reporters, all will come. Your family name will be destroyed. Your inheritance will disappear. Your brother will become your enemy." He paused, studying Daniel's face. "Are you prepared for that price?" Daniel's answer came without hesitation. "I've been preparing for 2 years. The only thing I wasn't prepared for was finding a family worth protecting along the way." His eyes found Emma's, and she felt something shift in her chest like desert wind changing direction. This broken, guilty man was choosing justice over comfort, truth over safety, just as John had done. The realization terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. As evening shadows lengthened across their modest homestead, Emma understood that their peaceful isolation was ending forever. Whatever came next would test every relationship, every loyalty, every choice that had brought them to this moment. But for the first time since John's death, she felt the stirring of hope. Dangerous, complicated hope that justice and love might somehow coexist in an unjust world. The confrontation came 3 days later, as sudden and violent as a desert thunderstorm. Emma was teaching Lucy to can preserves when the thunder of hoofbeats announced multiple riders approaching at dangerous speed. Through the kitchen window she counted 8 men. Marcus Thornfield leading a small army of hired guns, their faces hard as granite beneath wide-brimmed hats. "Children, cellar, now," Emma commanded, her voice carrying the steel authority that had kept her family alive through countless frontier dangers. Lucy grabbed Ben's hand, both understanding without question that their lives might depend on absolute obedience. Daniel emerged from the barn where he'd been reinforcing the doors, his borrowed rifle gleaming in the afternoon sun. Despite his healing wounds, he moved with lethal grace that spoke of military training Emma hadn't suspected. Mrs. Henderson appeared from seemingly nowhere, her ancient shotgun cradled with surprising expertise. "Thought you might need backup," the elderly woman said dryly. "I've been expecting this dance for 30 years. Joseph Blackhorse materialized from the desert shadows like an avenging spirit, his presence commanding despite carrying no visible weapons. Behind him came 2 younger Apache men, their faces painted for war in stark black and white patterns that made Emma's blood run cold. Marcus dismounted with theatrical flourish, his expensive suit immaculate despite the hard ride. His gray eyes swept over the defensive positions with professional assessment, noting how they'd transformed the modest homestead into a fortress in mere minutes. "Brother," Marcus called out, his voice carrying across the yard with false warmth. "You've caused quite a stir in Denver. Federal marshals are asking uncomfortable questions about your fantasies." "They're not fantasies, Marcus. You know what Father did." Daniel stepped into the open, deliberately exposing himself to demonstrate his lack of fear. 30 Apache died in Devil's Canyon. Children, Marcus. We built our fortune on children's graves. Marcus's facade cracked slightly, revealing something darker beneath his polished exterior. Father defended our family against savage attacks. Every man in this territory knows the Apache can't be trusted. They signed treaties with one hand while planning massacres with the other. "That's a lie!" Joseph's voice cut through the air like a war cry. "Running Bear came in peace, brought women and children to show good faith. Your father murdered them with poison whiskey while they slept off the celebration." "The word of a savage against a respected businessman," Marcus sneered, but his hand moved toward his sidearm. "Who will the territorial government believe?" "They'll believe the evidence," Daniel replied steadily. "Maps, witness statements, physical proof. And I've already given copies to federal investigators. Even if you kill me here, the truth will survive." Emma felt her world crystallizing around this moment, past and future balanced on the edge of violence. Her children huddled in the cellar while men with guns decided whether justice was worth dying for. She thought of John's final letter, his desperate hope that someone would finish what he'd started. "You always were weak, Daniel," Marcus said with poisonous disappointment. Father saw it even when we were children. Too much conscience, not enough spine. He should have left everything to me." "Maybe he should have," Daniel agreed quietly. "You might have handled the guilt better." The admission seemed to surprise Marcus, who had clearly expected defiance. His gun hand hesitated as confusion flickered across his features. Guilt? For defending ourselves against murderers? For becoming murderers ourselves? Daniel's voice carried profound sadness. "Don't you remember their faces, Marcus? The children who trusted us enough to drink from our cups? Little Hawk was 7 years old. He showed you his beaded necklace," said his grandmother, "made it specially for the peace ceremony." Marcus went rigid, his face draining of color. "Stop. You're remembering it wrong." "I'm remembering it clearly for the first time in 30 years. Father made us watch so we'd understand the price of weakness. He said mercy was a luxury Apache savages didn't deserve." Daniel took a step closer, his blue eyes boring into his brother's soul. "But they weren't savages, Marcus. They were families trying to survive, just like us." "Shut up." Marcus's voice cracked like a whip. "Father was protecting the territory. The Apache would have slaughtered every white settlement if we'd shown weakness." "Is that what you tell yourself at night?" Mrs. Henderson's voice carried decades of accumulated scorn. "I was there, boy. Saw your father's real face when he thought no one was watching. He didn't kill those Apache for protection. He killed them for gold deposits on their land." The hired guns shifted nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the turn of conversation. These were men paid to fight other men, not to participate in debates about historical justice. Several looked ready to bolt at the first excuse. Joseph Blackhorse stepped forward, his weathered face a mask of controlled fury. "Marcus Thornfield, you have carried this lie for 30 years. It has poisoned your heart and stolen your honor. Will you add more innocent blood to your father's debt?" "There are no innocents here," Marcus snarled, his composure finally shattering completely. "You Apache started the cycle of violence. Every white family you murdered, every settlement you burned, we were evening the score." "With children? With grandmothers?" Joseph's voice dropped to a whisper more terrifying than any shout. "My grandfather brought his smallest grandson to that ceremony, 3 years old, barely walking. Did that baby threaten your territory, Marcus Thornfield?" Emma watched Marcus's face cycle through rage, denial, and something that might have been dawning horror. She realized this was the first time anyone had forced him to confront the specific humanity of his father's victims. For 30 years, he'd been able to think of them as abstract threats rather than individual people with names and families and dreams. "I was 14, Marcus whispered, his gun hand beginning to shake. "Father said, he said they were planning to massacre us. He said it was them or us. And you believed him because it was easier than admitting you watched children die for gold," Daniel said gently. "I believed him too, Marcus. We were children ourselves, and children trust their fathers even when fathers become monsters." The confession hung in the desert air like heat shimmer. Emma realized she was witnessing the potential salvation or destruction of a man's soul, played out with guns and bitter truths under the unforgiving Arizona sun. One of the hired guns cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Mr. Thornfield, sir, maybe we should head back to town. This ain't what we signed up for." Marcus whirled on the man with wild eyes. "You signed up to follow orders. I'm paying you to bring my brother back alive." "To face what?" Daniel asked pointedly. "A sanitarium that doesn't exist. Federal investigators you can't bribe. The truth has a way of surfacing, Marcus. Father learned that before he died. Father died of a heart attack in his sleep. Father died choking on 30 years of guilt." Daniel's voice carried absolute conviction. "I was there, Marcus. His last words were Apache names. All the children he'd murdered. He died calling for Little Hawk's forgiveness." The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. He staggered backward, his face cycling through disbelief, rage, and something approaching devastation. Emma realized that his entire adult life had been built on maintaining his father's fiction. Admitting the truth would mean admitting he'd become complicit in his own deception. "You're lying," Marcus breathed, but his conviction was crumbling like desert sand. Father he never showed regret. "Because he couldn't afford to show it in front of you," Daniel said with infinite compassion. "He needed you to believe the lie so you could inherit his empire without inheriting his nightmares. But the nightmares came anyway, didn't they, Marcus? In your dreams, you still see their faces." The gun fell from Marcus's nerveless fingers, hitting the dust with a sound like thunder. His hired men exchanged uncertain glances, clearly recognizing that their employer was having some kind of breakdown. The careful choreography of violence was dissolving into something much more complex and dangerous, the collapse of a man's fundamental understanding of himself. Emma found herself holding her breath, understanding that whatever happened in the next few moments would determine whether justice was possible or whether they'd all be buried alongside the truth in unmarked graves. In the distance, storm clouds gathered over the mountains, promising the kind of sudden, violent weather that could change everything in minutes. The desert held its breath, waiting for Marcus Thornfield to choose between the comfortable lie that had shaped his life and the devastating truth that might destroy it. Marcus Thornfield's breakdown shattered like glass against stone, his carefully constructed world crumbling in the desert heat. He fell to his knees in the dust, 30 years of suppressed memories flooding back with devastating clarity. The hired guns shifted nervously, uncertain whether to flee or complete their mission as their employer wept openly for the first time since childhood. "I remember," Marcus whispered, his voice breaking like a 14-year-old boy's. "I remember little Hawk showing me his grandmother's beadwork. He wanted to trade it for my pocket knife. Said his grandfather told him white boys liked shiny things." His hands trembled as he covered his face. "I gave him the knife. He was so happy. And then Father made us watch them die." Daniel approached his brother slowly, holstering his rifle as he knelt beside the broken man. "I remember too. You cried that night." "Father beat you for showing weakness," said Thornfield. "Men don't weep for enemies." "But they weren't enemies," Marcus sobbed, the dam of 3 decades finally bursting. "They were children, families. And I've spent 30 years telling myself Father's lies because admitting the truth meant admitting I was complicit in murder." Joseph Blackhorse stepped forward, his weathered face showing the first hint of compassion Emma had seen. "The sins of fathers need not define their sons, Marcus Thornfield. My people understand the weight of inherited shame." But Marcus's breakdown had triggered something darker in the hired guns. Their leader, a scarred man named Webb, saw opportunity in chaos. "Boys," he muttered to his companions, "Thornfield's lost his mind, but there's still a bounty on the brother, and these Apache know too much." Emma's blood turned to ice as she recognized the shift in dynamics. These weren't loyal employees anymore. They were predators, sensing weakness, Mrs. Henderson must have seen it too, because her shotgun swung toward Webb with deadly intent. "I wouldn't, if I were you," the elderly woman said conversationally. "I've been shooting varmints longer than you've been breathing." Webb's laugh was ugly as a rattlesnake's warning. "Old woman, you're outnumbered 8-1. Smart thing would be to walk away and forget what you've heard." "The smart thing," came a new voice from the desert shadows, "would be to consider who else might be listening." Federal Marshal James Crawford emerged from behind the barn, his badge gleaming silver in the late afternoon sun. Behind him came 3 more federal agents, their rifles trained on the hired guns with professional precision. Emma's heart leaped with desperate hope. Daniel's evidence had reached the right people. "Gentlemen," Marshal Crawford announced formally, "you're all under arrest for conspiracy to obstruct federal investigation. Drop your weapons and step away from the horses." Webb's face twisted with cornered animal desperation. "This is a territorial matter, Marshal. You got no jurisdiction here." "Murder of federal treaty signatories makes it federal jurisdiction," Crawford replied calmly. "We've been investigating the Devil's Canyon massacre for 6 months. Mr. Daniel Thornfield's evidence provided the final pieces we needed." The standoff stretched taut as piano wire, everyone understanding that the next few seconds would determine who lived and who died. Emma thought of her children hiding in the cellar, probably listening to every word through the wooden floor. If violence erupted, Lucy and Ben would hear their mother's final moments. "Webb, don't be stupid," one of the other hired guns said nervously. "Federal marshals ain't worth dying over." But Webb was beyond reason, his hand inching toward his sidearm. Too much money at stake. The real Thornfield family heir made promises. His words were cut short by the distinctive crack of Mrs. Henderson's shotgun. Webb collapsed with a scream, clutching his shattered shoulder as his gun spun away across the desert sand. The elderly woman's aim had been deliberately precise, disabling rather than killing. "Warned you about varmints," she said mildly, already reloading with practiced efficiency. The remaining hired guns surrendered immediately, their hands raised high as federal agents moved in with shackles. The sudden resolution left everyone slightly stunned, as if a tornado had passed through without actually destroying anything vital. Marshal Crawford approached Daniel and Marcus, his expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Daniel Thornfield, I presume? We've been looking forward to speaking with you officially." Daniel rose slowly, helping his still sobbing brother to his feet. "Marshal, everything I told your investigators is true. I have additional evidence hidden at the original homestead if you need it." "We'll need formal statements from everyone present," Crawford replied. "This case will likely go to territorial court, possibly federal court, depending on jurisdiction disputes. Are you prepared for the scrutiny that will bring?" Emma felt her heart sink as the implications hit her. Court proceedings meant months, possibly years of legal battles. Newspaper reporters would descend like vultures, turning their private tragedy into public spectacle. Her children would grow up knowing their father died investigating a massacre, their peaceful homestead forever associated with violence and blood. "What about the land?" Joseph Blackhorse asked quietly. "The Apache burial ground, the stolen territory?" Marshal Crawford's expression grew complicated. "That's where things get difficult. The original treaty was legally signed, even if obtained through fraud. Reversing territorial land grants requires congressional action. It could take years if it happens at all. But the mining rights," Daniel said firmly, "those can be transferred immediately. And the Thornfield personal holdings, the ranch, the investments, everything built with blood money, that goes back to the Apache survivors, every penny." Marcus looked up from his misery, his tear-stained face showing something approaching gratitude. "Yes, Daniel's right. We can't undo Father's crimes, but we can stop profiting from them." Emma watched this exchange with growing dread. Noble as their intentions were, signing away the Thornfield fortune would leave Daniel with nothing. No land, no income, no way to support a family. The romantic notion of love conquering all suddenly seemed naive when confronted with practical realities. "There's something else," Marshal Crawford continued grimly. "Our investigation uncovered evidence that the massacre wasn't isolated. There were at least 3 other incidents across the territory, all following similar patterns: poisoned peace ceremonies, buried evidence, land grab aftermath." The revelation hit like a thunderbolt. Emma saw Joseph's face harden with renewed fury, while Daniel went pale as bleached bone. 30 Apache deaths had been just the beginning of a systematic campaign of genocide disguised as self-defense. "How many?" Joseph asked, his voice deadly quiet. We're still investigating, but preliminary evidence suggests over 100 victims across 4 years. Your father, Crawford said to Daniel, appears to have been the architect of territorial expansion through strategic murder. Daniel swayed as if physically struck. The weight of inherited guilt had just multiplied exponentially, and Emma watched the last vestiges of his composure crumble. This wasn't about one terrible night 30 years ago. It was about a legacy of calculated evil that made the Thornfield name synonymous with genocide. In the distance, storm clouds finally reached their homestead, bringing the first drops of rain in weeks. But instead of relief, the moisture felt like tears falling on cursed ground where too much blood had already been spilled. Emma realized their quiet life was ending forever, consumed by truths too large and terrible for any individual family to bear. The truth crashed down like the desert storm overhead, but it was Mrs. Henderson who delivered the most devastating revelation of all. As federal marshals secured the prisoners and the Apache elders conferred in hushed tones, the elderly woman approached Emma with a leather-bound journal that looked ancient beyond measure. "Child," Mrs. Henderson said softly, "there's something about your John you need to know, something that changes everything we've discussed today." Emma's hands trembled as she accepted the worn journal, its pages yellowed with age and stained with what looked suspiciously like dried blood. The handwriting inside was unmistakably John's, but these weren't the careful, loving letters she remembered. These entries were desperate, frantic, written by a man racing against time and death. November 15th, 1876, she read aloud, her voice barely a whisper. "I've discovered the truth about the Thornfield massacres, but the evidence runs deeper than anyone imagines. I'm not investigating them as an outsider. I was there. God forgive me, I was complicit in the Devil's Canyon murders." Daniel's head snapped up from where he'd been comforting Marcus. "That's impossible. John Thompson wasn't at Devil's Canyon. He would have been a child 30 years ago." Mrs. Henderson's weathered face held infinite sadness. "John Thompson wasn't his real name, Daniel. Tell her the rest, Emma. Read what your husband really was." Emma's vision blurred as she continued reading, each word a dagger through her carefully constructed memories. "My name is Jonathan Thornfield. I am the third son of William Thornfield, brother to Daniel and Marcus. I've lived the past 15 years as John Thompson, trying to escape the legacy of my father's crimes by becoming someone else entirely." The journal fell from Emma's nerveless fingers as the impossible truth sank in. Her beloved husband, the gentleman who'd built their homestead with his own hands, who'd sung lullabies to their children, who'd died protecting them, had been a Thornfield all along. The very family she'd learned to hate had produced the man she'd loved most in the world. "No," she whispered, backing away from Daniel as if he'd suddenly become venomous. "No, that's not possible. John hated the Thornfield family. He investigated them. He died fighting them." "He died fighting himself," Mrs. Henderson said gently. "Jonathan Thornfield was 17 when his father forced him to participate in the final massacre at Whitewater Creek. Unlike his brothers, he broke completely, ran away that very night, changed his name, tried to build a life free from his family's blood money." Daniel stared at the fallen journal as if it contained the secrets of the universe. "I remember Jonathan. He was my little brother, 10 years younger than me. Father said he died of fever when he was 18. His voice cracked with emotion. "You're telling me he became John Thompson, Emma's husband?" "The very same." Mrs. Henderson retrieved the journal, handling it like a sacred relic. "He came to me 20 years ago, broken and desperate, begging for help to disappear completely. I gave him new papers, a new history, helped him become the man Emma fell in love with." Emma felt her world spinning out of control, every certainty dissolving like sugar in rain. The man she'd mourned as a hero had been born into the very evil she now fought against. Her children carried Thornfield blood in their veins, making them complicit in Apache genocide by simple genetics. "But he fought against his family," she said desperately, clinging to the only truth that still made sense. "He gathered evidence. He tried to expose the massacres." "He died protecting Daniel's investigation, because he was trying to atone," Marcus said quietly, his own breakdown allowing him to see patterns that pride had previously hidden. "Jonathan always had the strongest conscience among us. Father's crimes destroyed him in ways they never destroyed Daniel and me." Joseph Blackhorse stepped forward, his dark eyes studying Emma with newfound intensity. "Your children," he said slowly. "They carry the blood of both victim and perpetrator. How does Apache justice weigh such complex inheritance?" The question hung in the storm-charged air like a threat. Emma realized with growing horror that her children might be seen as legitimate targets for Apache vengeance, innocent victims of their grandfather's sins and their father's hidden identity. "They're just children," she pleaded, maternal instinct overriding every other consideration. "They never knew about any of this." "Lucy and Ben are innocent, as were the Apache children who died for your family's greed," Joseph replied with inexorable logic. "The circle of blood debt includes all descendants according to traditional justice." Daniel stepped protectively between Joseph and Emma, his earlier submission replaced by fierce determination. "If you want Thornfield blood, take mine. I'm the eldest son, the primary heir. But Emma's children are innocents who deserve protection, not punishment." "All our children were innocents," Joseph said coldly. "That didn't save them from your father's poison." The confrontation might have escalated into violence, but Marcus's broken voice cut through the tension like a blade. "There's more," he whispered, still holding pages from the journal that Emma hadn't yet read. "Jonathan documented something Father never told us, something that changes everything." With shaking hands, he read from the final entries. "December 3rd, 1876. I've discovered why Father really killed the Apache. It wasn't for gold deposits or land grants. The chiefs he murdered weren't random targets, they were his business partners. Father was selling them guns and whiskey in violation of federal treaties, then murdering them to eliminate witnesses and steal back his merchandise." Emma felt sick as the true scope of William Thornfield's evil became clear. He hadn't just committed genocide. He'd betrayed his Apache partners, men who'd trusted him enough to attend peace ceremonies. The massacres weren't acts of racial hatred, but calculated business decisions designed to maximize profit while eliminating liability. "Every weapon those Apache died holding," Marcus continued reading, "every drop of whiskey in their stomachs, Father had sold to them hours before the poisoning. He murdered his own customers to avoid honoring his contracts." Joseph's stoic mask finally cracked, revealing fury so pure it seemed to burn the air around him. "My grandfather died holding a rifle he'd bought from the man who killed him. The last thing he saw was his business partner's face as the poison took hold." Daniel swayed as if the revelation had physically struck him. "We thought Father was protecting white settlements from Apache raids. But he was actually causing the raids by selling them weapons, then murdering them when they became inconvenient." The federal marshal stepped forward, his face grim with professional duty. "This new evidence makes the case federal on multiple counts: violation of treaty law, interstate commerce fraud, conspiracy to commit genocide. We're looking at the largest criminal conspiracy in territorial history." Emma watched the last foundations of her world crumble as the terrible arithmetic of guilt became clear. Her husband hadn't just been a Thornfield. He'd been complicit in weapons trafficking that had armed Apache raids against innocent settlers. His attempt at redemption had come 20 years too late to save the families destroyed by guns his father had sold. "How many died?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the storm. "How many settlers killed by weapons the Thornfield family provided?" Marshal Crawford consulted his notes grimly. "Preliminary investigation suggests at least 50 settlers across 12 raids, all armed with weapons traceable to Thornfield suppliers. Your father-in-law armed both sides of a race war, then eliminated his Apache partners when they became liabilities." The scope of inherited guilt was staggering. Emma's children weren't just descendants of murderers. They were heirs to a legacy that had destroyed hundreds of lives on both sides of the racial divide. Apache and settler families alike had been sacrificed to William Thornfield's greed for gold and power, but it was Mrs. Henderson who delivered the final devastating revelation. "There's one more thing," she said quietly, producing a final document from her seemingly endless supply of secrets. "This is Jonathan's last will and testament, written the night before he died. He knew Marcus's men were closing in, knew he wouldn't survive to see justice done." Emma's hand shook as she read her dead husband's final words. "To my beloved wife Emma and our precious children Lucy and Ben, I leave you the only inheritance I can give with a clean conscience, the truth and the choice of what to do with it. Hidden beneath our homestead's foundation are documents proving the location of every Apache burial ground, every murdered chief, every stolen acre. Use this evidence to restore what was stolen, or burn it, and live free from my family's sins. Either choice carries a price. I pray you'll never have to pay alone." The storm broke overhead with biblical fury, rain hammering their makeshift gathering like tears from a grieving sky. Emma realized that her husband's death hadn't ended the Thornfield legacy of violence. It had simply passed the burden of choice to her. She could use his evidence to seek justice for hundreds of victims, knowing it would destroy her children's future security. Or she could protect her family by burying the truth forever, knowing that Apache spirits would never rest and that stolen land would never be truly theirs. In the distance, thunder rolled across the desert like the voices of the dead, demanding answers that only the living could provide. 5 years had passed since the storm that changed everything, and the morning sun painted the Harmony Valley settlement in shades of hope and redemption. Emma stood on the porch of their new home, watching her children help tend the community garden where Apache and settler families worked side by side. The sight still filled her with wonder. Lucy, now 15, teaching Apache children to read English while learning their traditional plant medicine in return. Ben, 13 and tall as his father had been, working alongside Joseph Blackhorse's grandson to repair irrigation channels that served both communities equally. The settlement had grown from impossible dreams into thriving reality. Where once there had been only desert and bitter memories, now adobe houses clustered around a central plaza where children of all backgrounds played together. The school bell that rang each morning called Apache and settler children to the same desks, learning history that honored both their victories and their wounds. "Mama, look!" Lucy called out, her voice bright with excitement. She held up a letter bearing the official seal of the territorial government. "The federal court decision came through." Emma's heart quickened as she took the letter, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what it might contain. For 3 years they'd fought legal battles that seemed endless, testifying before congressional committees, providing evidence to federal investigators, facing down lawyers hired by distant Thornfield relatives who contested every acre returned to Apache control. The letter's contents made her sink onto the porch steps, overwhelmed by relief and vindication. "Full federal recognition of Apache land claims," she read aloud to the gathering crowd. restoration of original treaty boundaries. Congressional Reparations Fund established for all affected tribes. She looked up at the faces surrounding her. Daniel's weathered features showing quiet satisfaction. Marcus's scarred face reflecting hard-won peace. Joseph's dignified bearing masking tears of joy. "What about the criminal charges?" Daniel asked quietly. He'd spent 2 years in federal prison for his family's crimes, a sentence shortened by his cooperation and testimony. The experience had aged him, carved lines of acceptance around his blue eyes, but also given him a peace that wealth had never provided. Emma continued reading. All charges against living family members considered resolved through restitution and community service. She met Daniel's gaze across the crowd. "You're free, Daniel, truly free for the first time in your life." The celebration that followed was unlike anything Harmony Valley had seen. Apache drums mixed with fiddle music as two cultures that had learned to trust each other marked justice finally served. Children who might have grown up as enemies instead shared cake and laughter while their parents planned expanded schools and better irrigation systems. But it was the sunset ceremony that evening that truly marked their transformation. The entire community gathered at the memorial Joseph had built where the Apache burial ground had been restored. White limestone markers bore the names of massacre victims in both English and Apache, while native flowers planted by settler children bloomed around the sacred space. 5 years ago, Joseph spoke to the assembled crowd, his voice carrying across the desert evening. "I came to this place seeking vengeance for my grandfather's murder. I found instead the possibility of healing that includes rather than excludes. The dead have been honored. The stolen land has been returned. The circle of violence has been broken by those brave enough to choose justice over comfort." Daniel stepped forward, carrying a bundle wrapped in traditional Apache cloth. "Chief Black Horse, on behalf of my father's victims and in memory of my brother Jonathan, I return these to their proper resting place." He unwrapped the beaded necklaces and carved figures that had belonged to the murdered children, each artifact placed reverently at the memorial stones. Emma watched through tears as Marcus added his own contribution, a leather pouch containing William Thornfield's original confession, written in his final moments and hidden for 30 years. The document that had started their journey toward truth would now rest with those who deserved justice most. Mrs. Henderson, now 77 but still sharp as a blade, stepped forward with her own revelation. "I have one final gift for this community," she announced, producing a deed that made everyone gasp. "My homestead, all 800 acres, goes to the Harmony Valley settlement upon my death, to be held in common trust, never sold, never divided, a place where children of all peoples can grow up together." The generosity was staggering, but it was Mrs. Henderson's explanation that brought tears to every eye. "I've lived long enough to see hate transformed into love, vengeance transformed into justice. This land has seen too much blood. Let it now see only life, only growth, only the laughter of children who don't know they're supposed to be enemies." As the formal ceremony concluded, Emma found herself alone with Daniel beside the memorial stones. Their relationship had been tested by every revelation, every legal battle, every moment when they'd been forced to choose between love and justice. But they'd chosen both somehow, building something beautiful from the ashes of inherited guilt. "I have something for you," Daniel said softly, withdrawing a simple wooden box from his pocket. Inside lay a ring carved from Apache turquoise and silver, its design incorporating symbols from both cultures. Joseph's granddaughter made it. She said it was blessed by both Apache spirits and Christian prayers. Emma's breath caught as Daniel dropped to one knee beside her husband's memorial marker. "Emma Rose Thompson, you saved my life that first morning, but you saved my soul by teaching me that love can exist alongside justice. Will you marry me?" knowing that our children will inherit not wealth, but the harder gift of truth? Our children already inherit the most valuable gift possible, Emma replied, tears streaming down her face as she extended her hand. They inherit a world where their love story proves that healing is possible, that people can choose to be better than their worst ancestors. The ring slipped onto her finger like a promise of new beginnings as the desert stars emerged overhead. In the distance, they could hear their children's voices raised in song, Apache lullabies and Christian hymns blending into harmony that had once seemed impossible. Lucy appeared beside them, now young woman enough to understand the magnitude of what she'd witnessed. "Mama, will you tell your grandchildren about all this someday? About how love won over hate?" "I'll tell them," Emma promised, pulling her daughter close while Ben joined their family circle. "About how their grandfather John died seeking truth, how their stepfather Daniel chose justice over comfort, how their community proved that enemies can become family when they're brave enough to face painful history together." Marcus emerged from the shadows, his own transformation complete. The bitter, vengeful man who'd arrived seeking to destroy his brother had become the settlement's most dedicated teacher, helping Apache children learn legal skills they'd need to protect their restored rights. "Brother," he said to Daniel, "Jonathan would be proud of what we've built here." "We built it together," Daniel replied, embracing the brother he'd almost lost to hatred and guilt. "All of us, Apache, settler, survivors of victims, and descendants of perpetrators. We built it by choosing truth over comfortable lies." As midnight approached, the celebration gradually quieted into peaceful exhaustion. Families returned to homes where former enemies had become neighbors, where children fell asleep dreaming of futures unlimited by their ancestors' failures. Emma and Daniel walked hand in hand toward their modest adobe house, its windows glowing with lamplight and the sound of their children's quiet conversation. The wealth Daniel had inherited was gone, transformed into schools and hospitals and irrigation systems that served everyone equally. But the wealth they'd built together, trust, love, community, justice, would endure for generations. "Do you ever regret it?" Emma asked as they paused at their doorway. "Giving up the Thornfield fortune for this life?" Daniel looked back at Harmony Valley, the mixed community that had grown from seeds of tragedy and truth, the children who played together without seeing racial differences, the memorial where murdered Apache rested in honor rather than shame. "Emma," he said softly, "I spent the first 30 years of my life rich in money and poor in everything that matters. These past 5 years, I've been rich in ways my father never imagined possible." Inside their home, Lucy was reading Ben a story while he whittled a toy horse in the Apache style Joseph had taught him. The domestic scene was ordinary yet miraculous, a Thornfield household finally free from the blood and guilt that had defined their family name for so long. Emma's journal lay open on the kitchen table, its pages recording not just their personal journey, but the transformation of an entire community. Tomorrow she would write about the federal court decision, about the celebration, about the ring that symbolized love capable of surviving any truth. But tonight, she simply watched her family and marveled at how far they'd traveled from that blood-soaked morning when a dying cowboy had collapsed at her door, carrying secrets that changed everything. The desert wind whispered through their windows, carrying the scent of flowers planted on Apache graves and the distant sound of children's laughter. In Harmony Valley, the dead rested in peace, the living built hope, and love had indeed proven stronger than the deepest wounds of history. When Emma Rose first found that dying cowboy at her door, she never imagined her act of kindness would uncover a 30-year conspiracy that destroyed hundreds of lives. But sometimes The greatest gifts come wrapped in our darkest moments. This story reminds us that it's never too late to choose healing over hatred, truth over comfortable lies. Emma's children grew up in Harmony Valley, where former enemies became family through the simple power of facing painful history together. At 55, 60, or 68, we've all inherited complicated legacies, family secrets, generational wounds, relationships broken by pride or misunderstanding. But like Daniel Thornfield, who gave up his fortune to restore stolen land, we can choose redemption over resentment. Like Emma, who married across the bloodiest divide in frontier history, we can choose love that bridges any chasm. The Apache and settlers of Harmony Valley proved that communities heal when people are brave enough to tell the truth and humble enough to forgive. Your own family story may carry pain, but it also carries the seeds of restoration. What broken relationships in your life could be healed if you chose courage over comfort? What legacy of love could you build for your grandchildren if you refused to let old wounds define your remaining years? Discussion questions. What family wounds or generational conflicts in your own life could benefit from the kind of honest conversation Emma and Daniel had? How have you seen love triumph over long-standing grudges or prejudices in your community or family? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story of healing might inspire another reader to choose hope over bitterness.